My dear friends, have you ever been tempted to cry out, "It's not fair"? It's a common lament of children, and testimony, I believe, to something innate in us. We all have an inherent sense of justice, that life can sometimes obstruct or obscure, but it's always there. Which is why Jesus' parable today is so shocking. It seems to violate codes of fairness. Let's ponder the landlord's question at the end, which is really God's question to us. Are you envious that I am generous? Here is a vision of God's abundant grace. I'm fond of something that Rowan Williams used to say, that trying to possess God's grace is like cupping our hands beneath Niagara Falls. It links back to the discussion from the Gospel last week about not judging one another and always being prepared to offer forgiveness, not just 7 times, but 77 times. God doesn't have a limit on his grace. And if we live in the land of grace, then our role is not to hoard that wealth, but to pass it on, pass it forward, to be perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. So with that in mind, let's think about our story. The workers at the beginning received what they had agreed to receive. They hadn't been cheated in any way. Their unhappiness simply stems from looking at what other people have received. They are comparing themselves, and misery is the only result when we start to compare ourselves with others, for always there will be people who have more and people who have less than us. God seeks to end rivalry between people. The contest for social status is the way that the world works, not the way that God works. And our orientation must be towards God, not others. If we do that, then we become people of peace, showing all the fruits of the Spirit rather than people of strife. We stop comparing, and so we stop judging, and then we stop grumbling. One other thread from our story today I think it's worth spending time with. It's never too late. Even if it seems as if the light is fading, it's still possible to go into the vineyard, to do the work of God, and to receive the divine wages. In other words, don't clock watch. That's another element of worldliness. There is always more work to do in the Lord's vineyard, so we need to get on and concentrate on the work we've been given to do, not looking sideways at what other people are doing, but simply reflecting and considering what it is that we are given as our task. In other words, to listen to God's call. The thing is, we're creatures who live within the stream of time. You could say we're trapped within it. But God isn't. God created time, and that means that God's perspective is not bound by time. And so the length of time that we spend doing God's work is not the essential thing. The essential thing is that there is a point in our lives when we recognize God's call upon us and give a wholehearted yes, and then go out into the vineyard to do the work. Maybe it will be the equivalent of 5 minutes before the end. Maybe it will be a long lifetime's worth, but the reward is the same. In the end, I think the only question we are required to answer is, what did you do with the gifts God gave to you? Did we bury them because we were distracted by the desires of the world, or by a rivalrous desire to get ahead of others? I read recently of a 75-year-old woman who had taken up climbing mountains in her retirement. I thought that was wonderful on many levels. Someone who was still giving an emphatic and thankful yes to God, and also someone who, I'm sure, found the time and space to talk with God from the mountaintop. For that's the most important labour in the vineyard, prayer, and we're never too old to pray. The message of our gospel today is that we are to heed the call and to go to work in the vineyard, ignoring everything else. What God gives can't be improved upon. It's not a question of more or less. It's not a question of relative merit. If we respond to the call, then we receive the pearl of great price, and that is an unsurpassable wage. May God prosper the work of our hands. Until we meet again. Amen.